preface this workshop or producer education session, what we're going to talk about today is not a real pleasant topic. It's one that keeps me up sometimes. Bottom line is, if we worry about some of these things beforehand, we don't have to worry about them so much when they actually happen. But nobody wants to think about African swine fever or about foot and mouth disease or some other foreign animal disease causing a depopulation event, but we know those things can happen. I hope some of you attended the workshop that was presented earlier today. This workshop actually focuses on what happens after you've got the diagnosis, after the decision's made to depop. Okay, and as I was working on putting this workshop together earlier in the year, thought, what's going to happen in these situations? I've been involved in one situation where we had a mass loss and we had to deal with a lot of carcasses real quick, and thought about the people involved in that, and it kind of grew from there. So we put together a panel today with that was introduced here earlier. These are the folks that if you run into a situation with foreign animal disease and depopulation, these are the people you're going to be working with to make that happen. Hope you all learn a few things today. I'm going to let each one of them go through. They each have a segment of presentation today that they want to give. And then after that, we're going to open up to discussion. And if you all don't have a bunch of really good discussion questions, don't think you're going to get out of here any quicker, because I've got a bunch. We'll fill in the time. Okay, well, with that, I didn't ask who's going to go first. Dr. Lackman's going to go first. I'm going to turn it over to her. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Good afternoon. I hope everybody got to enjoy that really nice meal we had, and you don't fall asleep during this. Is that what I need, or is this one? I'm good? Okay. So I'm going to start with the depopulation aspect of things. And the first thing I want to do is clarify euthanasia and depopulation are two different terms. A lot of people use them interchangeably, but AVMA guidelines say that the euthanasia is the transitioning of an animal to death with as little pain and stress to the animals as possible, whereas depopulation is the mass killing of animals to eradicate the disease and suffering to eradicate disease and suffering during a large-scale emergency, such as an African swine fever outbreak. So there's a little bit of difference when you have the depopulation versus euthanasia. So the depopulation methods that would be approved for swine is captive bolt device, electrocution, carbon dioxide inhalation, nitrogen foam, gunshot, and ventilation shutdown. The first one we're going to talk about, I think probably most people are familiar, if you've been on a swine operation, the captive bolt device. The practicality will decrease when time's a factor, which time's always a factor if we would have an ASF outbreak or a CSF outbreak, and the number of swine to depopulate increases. Approved type's going to depend on the weight and the age of the pig. They have non-penetrating and penetrating, require proper restraint. Human safety is always a factor, along with users need to be trained. Electrocution, it's for pigs that are greater than 10 pounds. You can do a head to heart. If you do secondary methods, going to be needed if you do the head only, and then you need to apply the secondary method within 15 seconds. Human safety is always a factor also, and ensure that the adequate amperage and voltage for age in the pig to render brain insensible and initiate cardiac arrest in the time period. Nebraska has got an electrocution trailer where the pigs actually walk up and there's a V-belt. It takes them in there. No humans have to be there, because that's always a safety with electricity. And it has a paddle on the side and then the head to electrocute them, and then they'll come out the front. They estimate that they could depopulate about 300 market hogs per hour with that unit. Carbon dioxide inhalation with the COVID disruption. I'm sure some of you all heard of that. North Carolina developed a CO2 trailer along with some other states. It's practical. There's a reduced physical demand. Proper flow rates are important on the CO2 rates. You require airtight chambers, trainable. The the pigs would go in a trailer or carton, and then for 5 minutes you'd run the gas, and then they have about a 15-minute dwell time. North Carolina figured out with their market hogs they could do about 400 an hour of more market hogs, so about 4,000 market hogs per day with a 10-hour period. Nitrogen foam, it's widely used in Europe. It's being developed in the United States. And nitrogen gas bubbles, and then the pig breaks those bubbles and they breathe the nitrogen in. Some issues with it is if it's in a barn, getting those carcasses out of the barn. So ideally you take it outside where you have a Tyvek you can put around to put the foam in there to depopulate. Gunshot, again, practicality like the captive bolt device of using decreases as the number of the swine to be depopulated increases. Ideally, the pigs should be outdoors and on the soil. Human safety is always a factor. It's an effective technique, but with the gun and the ammunition size, requires firearm safety training, and with ASF that virus is carried in the blood, and so anytime you have a bloody mess, you also have more exposure to the virus itself. And with all these methods, you have to have the considerations of the type of animals that you're depopulating, the facility, the structure of the facility, the methods that's going to be used, the practicality, the reliability, the personnel that you have available to help with the depopulation, again, the carcass considerations, and what equipment's available. You know, you can say, well, we could do this or that, but do you really have the equipment available along with the personnel to run that equipment? And then we always have to concern ourselves with the environment, which DNR will talk about, Kirsten will talk about a little bit later. Thank you. Oh, I missed one, sorry. Ventilation shutdown plus. This is an extreme situation, and that's, again, where you'd want an open barn facility. The facility needs to be sealed, and a lot of times an additional heat source will be required. They close the barn up. They're going to shut down the inlets, shut down the fans, and then a lot of times add heat to create hyperthermia to kill the pigs. You want a place where you can control the air temperature, and the goal is to have greater than 95% death in less than an hour. Sorry, Bill, you're next.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about disposal methods that we'll use if we have mass depopulation. The first two that I'm going to talk about are the composting and above ground burial. That's our preferred methods for disposal. Then we have on farm deep burial, sealed landfills, incineration, open air burning, and rendering. Rendering, I'll go over that towards the end, usually isn't an option when we have animal disease involved. Composting, it's a mixture of arts and science. It's anaerobic, thermophilic, microbial digestion. You need to have correct ratios of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and water. A lot of people will have too dry of compost piles, and the composting slows down or even shuts down if you don't have adequate moisture. So moisture is pretty important. A lot of people don't realize that. Pile construction is the key to effectiveness. You can kind of see the diagram over there. You don't really want your compost pile to be more than 12 to 16 feet. Normally 8 to 10 foot is a good width to have in your piles. Then you have a base layer of 18 to 24 inches. Then you have your core matter, so your animal. Then you'll cap it off with at least 18 to 24 inches of a carbon source, and that kind of seals the smell from getting out, so your varmints and the odor is not a nuisance to your neighbors. Then if you build it right, it should heat up to 145 to up to 160 degrees. As it goes through that decomposition process, the bacteria release that heat, So that's how you monitor a pile. You have 3-foot thermometers that you stick in there, and you have usually a couple different spots you take it, and you want to monitor your pile every day to make sure it's being effective. If your temperature is not reaching that height, and then you got to figure out, okay, what's wrong? Is there not enough moisture? So you grab that carbon source and you want to squeeze it, and if water comes out, it's too moist. If you let go of it and it falls right to dust, then it's probably too dry. So it's just a kind of an art to figure out how to make a compost pile as best as possible. And that's why we have subject matter experts within USDA and a lot of state governments to make sure that the process is done correctly. Okay, producers. Oop. Guess pros. The pros, quick and convenient, APHIS approved. You have minimal equipment needed. It's odorless if you do it right. If you go by your compost pile and you smell it, well, you didn't build it right. Final product has some value. It's more of a soil additive. It's not going to be a fertilizer. A lot of people have that misconception about compost piles. It's not really high in fertilizer value, but it is a good soil additive. It'll add bacteria and looseners to your soil. And then, like I said before, we have subject matter experts available. The cons, I don't have these on my slide. Oh, there they are. The cons, you need land resource. So when we had HighPath AI in 2015, we had some compost windrows that went for a quarter mile or more. So it takes a lot of land. Site selection, approval. You don't want to have water running across into your compost pile and creating a problem, or have runoff from that pile. Carbon source availability. Here in Missouri, we have a lot of wood products, so wood chips and wood shavings would be our number one. Up north, northern Missouri, corn stover might be an option. Scavengers. If you build your pile correctly, the scavengers usually will walk right by. In the past, they put some cameras on some compost windrows, and the animals actually walk right by. They're not even attracted to the windrow. And that's if you build it right. Like I said, you should be able to walk outside. You shouldn't see flies. You shouldn't smell it. If you smell it and see flies, well, you didn't probably put your cap on correctly or deep enough. Then monitoring requirements. You have to take temperatures daily to make sure it's effective. Above ground burial. It's one of our favorite because you use a lot less carbon source, usually up to 75% less carbon. So you dig a 20-inch trench, and then you put down some carbon, usually around 12 inches. Then you put your carcass in there, and then with the dirt that you excavated digging a trench, you bury it with that. And so it's kind of a composting. It's just barely into the ground, so water contamination risks are minimal compared to deep burial. And like I said, it's a lot less carbon required, so that's a good thing when you start looking at bringing in a lot of truckloads of carbon. Let's see. It's hybrid between deep burial and composting. It's APHIS approved protocol, so that's good if we're getting indemnity money for disposal. It's a shallow trench with carbon materials. The new term is called shallow burial with carbon source. So they're going to change the name instead of above ground burial, but that's somebody else high up decided to do that. It's more earth between the decay, so like I said, it's safer for the water supply, the water table. Benefits of above ground burial. Traditional burial with less environmental impact, less carbon required, low cost, low technology. It's pretty biosecure, and it enhances environmental protection. On-farm deep burial requires land resources. You can only bury in certain spots, and what we do, we work with our Department of Natural Resource colleagues and have them determine where burial is possible. I'm sure they'll have a little map that shows Missouri. Most of Missouri, deep burial is not a good option. And I think with swine, the statute says 6 pigs per acre. I think if over 150 pounds, so you don't have a lot of pigs that you can bury per acre. So it's not a good option. You need heavy equipment because you need to dig down at least 3 foot, no deeper than 6 foot. So you need some heavy equipment, and a lot of Missouri is pretty rocky. So I know my farm outside the lake area, if I need to dig 6 feet or even 5 feet down, I'm going to need some dynamite to get through that rock. Carcass size, volume limitations. And then you need approval by the state. So we don't really prefer deep burial. The pros, you have it's relatively quick, low risk of disease spread, and speeds up time to restock that farm. The cons, you've got geographical limitations, slow carcass decomposition. I dug up a spot where we buried turkeys, and 15 years later there was still meat on the bones. So it is a risk of your water table. That meat's not going to go nowhere because it's anaerobic. There's no oxygen getting down there. Your insect larvae and stuff's not going to get down there to decompose it. So it lasts a long time. You got leachate problems, limited land use, and then C&D of equipment. Your sealed landfills can be an option for a disease outbreak, but they'll have to go in bio bags or sealed containers so you don't have any leakage and spreading the virus. Landfills are privately owned, so you need to work with them. It's highly regulated, so you need permits from DNR to be able to bring carcasses into a landfill. You need state animal health approval. In most landfills, it's by the tonnage, so they weigh your trucks going in, weigh your trucks going out. And if you have, let's say, a 5,000 swine operation, you may have way too much weight that they don't want coming into their landfill. So the tonnage can be a limiting factor, whether you can use a sealed landfill. Then you have agreements. So normally, if we want to go to a landfill, it's going to probably take 48 hours, 2 days to get approval so we can take the animals to that landfill. So it can delay you, and actually I've had it even be delayed longer than that, getting the corporate owners of the landfill to approve it. Then you need additional biosecurity so you don't take that disease off that farm and spread it somewhere else. The pros, it conserves producers' land, so you don't have those carcasses on that property. Non-residual property concerns, speed of time, so you take it off and you can hurry up and start your countdown to where you can restock. So a lot of times it's at least a 30-day period once you're totally C&D'd before you can restock. Depends on the disease though. The cons, increased biosecurity concerns, slow resource, it's intensive. If you use bio bags and you got those animals in that bio bag and you go to take them to the landfill, and then the landfill's says, well, I need to get some permits approved and get okay from up higher up. They may delay you. Well, you got those animals in that bio bag. Well, it's sealed, so as those animals start to decompose and give off gas, it's going to balloon up. And if you don't watch it, those bio bags can blow up on you. So that can create a big problem. Then driver limitations, permitting. public perception. Incineration, for mass disposal, it's probably not going to be an option. There are some large incinerators that require a lot of propane, and it still only can take so many animals per hour for it to incinerate. It's good for daily mortality, but for mass disposal, I haven't really seen a unit available that we can take on. Then, like I said, the propane usage is pretty bad. Requires 7 to 10 days to get ready, if you can find one. You have electric propane sources. Off-site location, so you have to haul the animals off. So with the disease, we try to keep them on the site, so we'll probably try to move the incinerator on site so we can use it there. Excess liquid. So a large carcass is, a lot of moisture in that carcass. It takes a lot of fire to burn that animal. So you're going to use a lot more propane. Expensive and slow. Smaller units used on farms for daily mortality. Maybe adjacent with other methods. And that's the thing with all these methods, we're probably not going to just use one. We may do a little deep burial if there's approved spots on that farm, but chances are we might start with above ground burial and then go to composting. So a combination of 1 or 2 or 3 methods will probably be used on some of these farms just to help give better access to getting the animals disposed of quickly and properly. Open air burning, we got this slide in here. This is what they did over in England when they had foot and mouth disease. It's not a preferred method, and it'll probably only be used as one of the last resorts, and we'll have to get DNR permits to do the burning and all that. But it is an option if it comes down to it. Public perception, so they don't like it. Political, environmental permits, fuel source, so you're going to have a lot of carbon source to burn, so you can burn them carcasses up thoroughly. Local fire department permits, so some counties may not allow it if we'd ever have to go to it. And that's the political part. Your county commissioners may say, not in my county. Weather considerations, if it's rainy, it may not burn as good. Rendering. Rendering's all right. Normally, if it's a disease-involved disposal process, rendering's not going to be an option because their buyers aren't going to want rendering product that came from diseased animals. So basically, they're going to say, no, I don't want any animals coming that may be off that disease or whatever a disease outbreak deals with. It's continuous, low, 240 degrees, so it will kill viruses and bacteria, but their buyers do not want their rendered product being used, or they're not going to buy it. A lot of rendering product is used for pet foods, and pet food buyers won't go for it. Livestock, pet feed, fertilizer, biosecurity concern, hauling to the rendering plant. The rendering trucks are sealed to where they're not supposed to have leakage coming out. There is a look at doing some on-farm rendering where we have a rendering truck come into a farm and actually render the animals on site. And it's, like I said, it's non-diseased animals. Disposal, I think this is yours now. So thank you guys.
Okay, my name is Kirsten Schaefer, and today I'm going to be stepping in for my boss, Sherri Stoner, who unfortunately can't be with us today. I'm also a geologist with the Missouri Geological Survey. We are a branch of the Department of Natural Resources, And I'm sure you may be wondering why the DNR has geologists involved in animal mortality events. And the short answer is groundwater. So I lead the Environmental Assistance Unit, and day to day, our job is essentially to ensure that industry can be productive on the surface while minimally disrupting groundwater in the subsurface. So our projects involve landfills, sinkholes, municipal wastewater treatment facilities, but in the unfortunate event that we have a mass animal mortality in the state, we also provide technical assistance and burial site approval, and we give our recommendations to Dr. Schruberg to make final decisions as to whether or not deep on-site burial is appropriate. So today I'm going to be talking a lot about the law. And when I'm talking about the law, what I'm referring to is this revised statute of Missouri, Chapter 269, disposal of dead animals. So it is in statute that mass animal mortalities are overseen by the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Agriculture. And this is specifically for catastrophic mortality events when you have a large amount of your population dying at one point in time, or if you need to depopulate. Today, I will be focusing on on-site burial since that's what we provide technical assistance for. However, this law is explicit and it covers all sorts of different disposal options. So I highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with the expectations included in this law. It's important to understand those if you ever have to deal with an emergency situation like this. One of the things that the law is explicit about is it provides a timeline. So you are expected to deal with this within 24 hours from knowledge of such death. And 24 hours is not a lot of time to deal with an emergency of this situation, especially depending on the size of your operation. So we do provide the technical assistance for on-site deep burial. And as Bill said, deep burial is the least desirable, and that's because of the potential effects to human and environmental health and safety. Improper disposal can result in surface and groundwater contamination, and really that means we're looking at potentially contaminated wells or other public drinking water resources. And so for me, I think it's important to understand what's going on during this decomposition process to see why we need to come out for technical assistance. So say we have a mass animal mortality event and we decide to do trench burial on site. We dig our pit, we dispose of our animals and cover it with soil, and after some time, then decomposition starts. And during that decomposition process, a liquid leachate is formed. And so that leachate is then going to percolate down through the soil to the groundwater level. And it's our job to make sure that a proper site is chosen that has the soil characteristics and thickness to properly filter that leachate. We can get involved in a couple of different fashions, the first of which is through emergency services. And this is really in a reactive fashion. Within that 24-hour time period, early on, either you or somebody from the Department of Agriculture gets in contact with us to come out and provide that technical assistance and burial site approval. And really what we come out and look at is determining groundwater contamination potential. So we'll assess the property for characteristics such as percolation rate. What kind of soil are we looking at? How deep is that soil? What's the water, the groundwater elevation, as well as are you in potentially a floodplain? We also look at the bedrock characteristics to see if the bedrock is fractured or if we're in a karst environment where you would have conduits that would provide faster flow to the groundwater. The statute provides us the ability to determine if we have a major groundwater contamination potential area. And I've talked a lot about the technical side because that's what I do, but what does that mean for you as a producer? And Bill touched on this a little bit. The law specifically states that in the event that you have to bury on site, if you are in an area of normal groundwater contamination potential, you are allowed to bury 44 swine per acre. However, if it's determined that it's a major groundwater contamination potential area, then that number is drastically reduced to 6 swine per acre. That blue color really doesn't show on that map at all. So what I have here is a map of the major groundwater contamination potential areas, but you can't really see it here, which is a shame. However, it does exist, and this map is really for you to provide assistance in whether or not you may be in a major groundwater contamination potential area when you're planning for an emergency event like this. So we looked at floodplains, we looked at karst bedrock, and we looked at shallow groundwater levels and compiled all of that information to create a map of locations that are likely going to have a major groundwater contamination potential. So since you can't see it, some things for you to think about is your property near a major river? Are you close to the Missouri or Mississippi? Are there any caves, springs, or sinkholes near you? And if the answer is yes to any of those questions, then you are very likely in an area that would be considered major groundwater contamination potential, so the number of swine that you could bury would be drastically reduced. It is important to state, though, that a site-specific evaluation in these situations are always necessary. You'll give us a call and we will come out to have geologists make sure that there is a proper site for burial if the site is conducive. So the law also provides a laundry list of other expectations besides the number of carcasses and the loading rates. We have dimensions for the trenches. The trench can be a maximum of 6 feet deep if the conditions are correct. Once you have your 6 feet, then you have to cover any animals with 2.5 feet of soil. So that means you're essentially working with a 3.5 foot maximum burial area. So it's a small space to bury. The law provides setbacks, so you have to be at least 50 feet from any property lines, 100 feet from surface water, streams, ponds, lagoons, and 300 feet from any wells, losing streams, or springs. And then if you are dealing with larger animals, 150 pounds or greater, the abdominal cavity has to be punctured before any burial is begun. And honestly, that's a lot to remember. That's a lot to go over here. And that just scratches the surface because I'm only talking about on-site burial. So it brings me to the next way that the Missouri Geological Survey can be involved, and that's through preemptive services. So this is in a proactive fashion. If you would like, we have started this new service where we will come out to your property and conduct that site evaluation at your convenience. So it's a free service that the state is offering. All we need is for you to dig a test pit so we can characterize the soil, and then we'll evaluate your entire property. We've done properties 10,000 acres and larger, so we can evaluate your entire property, and we'll go out there and identify any potential hazards and find suitable areas for burial if appropriate. After we come out and do that site evaluation, we'll write up a report that gives you that maximum excavation depth, as well as that groundwater contamination potential evaluation, so you have a better idea of, can I bury on my property, and if so, how many swine would I be able to bury in that event? So in addition to that report, we also will create a map for you, and that provides some more information. It provides the visual of where the pre-approved locations or suitable locations are, as well as those setback distances that I was talking about before. So we also try to take logistics and accessibility into consideration. So if you have a couple of sites that could potentially be suitable for burial, then we're going to work to try to pre-approve locations that are going to be both convenient for you as well as protective of groundwater resources, because that benefits both of us. Speaking of resources, we've got a couple of them here that I highly recommend. The University of Missouri Extension provides some guidelines, not only for on-site burial, but other alternative methods of disposal. We've got the DNR emergency procedures. We printed out some, and I've got some on the table right as you're walking out, so if you're interested in that resource, feel free to pick it up. And then once again, that Chapter 269, it's just really a good idea to look over that so you have an idea of what your responsibility would be in this emergency situation, and really to help you develop an emergency action plan, because that's going to be the best practice for all of us here. And with that, I also, if you're interested in our preemptive services, I've got a sign-up sheet. If you want more information, feel free to leave your contact information or take my business card that's sitting up there as well. But now I will pass it over to Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to grab your?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, appreciate everybody's attendance. We are getting pretty close on time. I had some discussion questions lined up, but would prefer to let you all, has anybody got a burning question about this topic they would like to have answered real quick while we've got panelists here? Okay. Well, the panelists, I think, will be around for a little while if you want to have discussions with them after the session's over. I'm just going to go real quick to one question. Bill, you've had experience with this, and Dr. Lackman, I'm sure you have. How long does it take? Let's say the scenario I had was a 1,200 head sow farm. How long does it take to depopulate a farm like that, and how many people are needed?
Well, it depends on the method you're going to use to depopulate. We got some methods we're looking at that may be able to do up to 5,000 in a day. But practicality, it'll probably be more like 2,000 in a day. If we're using captive bolt guns, it just depends how many people you have, how many guns. It will take a lot of people. With the nitrogen foam, you're probably going to at least need close to a dozen people because you're going to have to get those pigs out of the barn into an area to where you can foam them. Then you got to have people coming in, scooping up the dead, and taking them to a disposal site.
So about how many people would you need on site?
On site, I mean, minimum a dozen, but probably more like 20. With captive bolt gun, you may need, what'd you say, 1,200? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Probably 20 to 30 people. It's just really hard on your wrist and hands. And then you got to have somebody reloading those guns because it's single shots. So then experience is going to make a difference too. So CO2, a lot of CO2, they're able to do about 120 an hour, up to 300, and that's if everything's going right. Electrocution, usually 200 to 300 an hour once you get it working right. But you still got to have people running those pigs into those containers for either CO2 or to electrocute them, then somebody handle them once they come out. So.